Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is a privilege to rise today and speak on Bill C-12, titled Strengthening Canada's Immigration System and Borders Act. We're here today discussing this bill instead of Liberal Bill C-2 because Liberal Bill C-2 was met with considerable opposition from members of this House and from civil society groups who made it clear that this legislation would not be able to move forward without significant revisions. And so today we're debating Bill C-12. Despite the sweeping powers this government proposed in C-2, the Liberal government did not even bother to consult with the Privacy Commissioner about the impacts that this legislation would have on the privacy rights of Canadians. And it's only because of the accountability provided by members of the opposition in this House that we were able to push that legislation back so that we could focus on legislation that would at least try to repair the damage of the last 10 years of this Liberal government by introducing changes on the border. Now, the objectives of this bill for those constituents of mine who are watching at home are several. They include, but not limited to, creating an expedited pathway for the Minister of Health to add precursor chemicals used in the production of deadly drugs such as fentanyl as controlled substances under the Criminal Code. And for the past few years, we've seen the devastation of the fentanyl overdose crisis in Canada, and we've been hearing at Public Safety Committee about some of the many gaps that we have in this country, including testimony that has indicated that the non-resident import program is being used to smuggle these precursor chemicals into Canada with less stringency at the border, which is creating a situation where Canada has become a major producer of fentanyl. And this fentanyl is being exported. We've seen recent stories of countries like New Zealand and Australia being the recipients of drugs like fentanyl and methamphetamine. And clearly, this is not the reputation that a great country like Canada wants to have. Another part of this legislation seeks to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to eliminate the designated countries of origin regime, which has been identified as a loophole. It will give the minister the powers to specify that required documents are needed to support a refugee claim. It will require the suspension of certain refugee protection proceedings if the claimant is not present in Canada, something which I think should be common sense, that somebody should be present in Canada if they're claiming refugee status here. It seeks to change the Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Acts to increase the maximum monetary penalties for those who are charged under these acts. And it also seeks to make certain changes to the Sex Offender Information Registry Act to allow for increased reporting of the offender's description, as well as changes to the circumstances and frequency of reporting. It will also allow for information that has been previously collected to be disclosed if it can reasonably be expected to assist in the prevention or investigation of a crime of a sexual nature. Once again, I think these things are long overdue. We probably need to go even further, but certainly not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one. So even with this second attempt at this legislation, the Liberal bill still fails to address the key issue of bail reform. We know that catch and release is alive and well for those who traffic in fentanyl and use illegal firearms, using our porous border to victimize more and more Canadian families. We know that the sentencing provisions that were passed by this government under C-75 and C-5 have still made it so that there are no mandatory prison times for those who traffic fentanyl. And there are still no new mandatory prison times for gangsters who use illegal guns to commit crimes, despite this Liberals' government's incessant campaign against law-abiding gun owners. And we also know that house arrest is still being used in extensive cases relating to violent criminals. Once again, this is unacceptable. Now, that said, I think we can all agree that strengthening our border is critical, and that's where legislation is desperately needed in this area. After 10 years of these reckless Liberal policies, our border is broken, and we need to fix it. The Liberal soft on crime agenda has made Canada a destination for international organized criminals trafficking in drugs, weapons, people, and stolen cars. These gangs are committing brutal crimes on our streets every day. Now, the Public Safety Committee has looked at these issues in depth, and we've repeatedly heard that it's the broken bail system that has contributed to this crisis. Organized criminals have chosen to make Canada their home because of our weak laws. We also know that this government's failed immigration policies have also assisted with making Canada a destination for international organized crime. This government has, in the past, removed visa requirements over the objections of our law enforcement agencies, who stated that the removal of these visas would increase the risk of organized crime taking root in this country, and yet this government moved forward with it anyways. And it's critical that these policies be reversed so that we can once again make Canada the safest country in the world. Now, I want to be clear that nothing that I'm saying today is a criticism of our brave frontline law enforcement officers in the RCMP and the CBSA. We know that they're doing their absolute best. We've heard from police associations in Ontario. I've heard from RCMP members in my riding when I'm out knocking on doors just this past election, for example, that they're arresting people and they're seeing them go out on the street. These are for drug offenses. They're going out on the street mere hours after being arrested. How demoralizing for our frontline officers, Mr. Speaker. We have heard from Mark Weber of the Customs Union, the union that represents CBSA workers, that morale at the CBSA is at the lowest levels he's ever seen. That's after 10 years of this Liberal government. Now we see this government keeps recycling its promises to keep hiring more border services officers, but it's clear that much more needs to be done to strengthen our border and our security service. Canada has the largest undefended border in the world, and that was something that I think we could all be very proud of as a country. But the lack of resources to the CBSA to do their role has seen a rise in smuggling in this country, a rise in human trafficking, and a rise in people coming to this country to pursue their criminal activities. It's skyrocketed over the past decade. The CBSA has been sounding the alarm, but this government hasn't been listening. There is plenty of evidence to substantiate these points, but I'll pick one specific example. At Immigration Committee, IRCC officials have stated that they believe that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of violent criminals who are here illegally. These are violent criminals who are not citizens, they're not permanent residents, they're temporary residents who are violent people, and they have no idea where these people are. And currently, when I asked the Customs and Union employee, they said there's only a couple hundred CBSA officers who are tasked with trying to track down these thousands of violent criminals who are at large in this country, and it's unacceptable. We also know that on the nonviolent side that there are currently around 50,000 people who have come to Canada on student visas whose visas have now run out. They are here illegally, and CBSA does not have the resources to reach out to these people, and they do not have the resources to remove these people who are now in this country illegally. And despite these shockingly high figures, as I said, there's something like only 300 CBSA officers who've been dedicated to this gargantuan task. Now, one of the reasons why CBSA is suffering so much, as their union said, is that they're drowning in middle management. They're not getting the frontline officers that they need to do the job. And that's endemic of everything that this Liberal government has done for the last 10 years. Let's look at this great paradox where we have a government where the bureaucracy has grown by 45% across the civil service, and yet we have less frontline workers in critical areas like the CBSA, RCMP, and the Canadian Armed Forces than ever before. How does that make any sense? They're padding middle management and upper management at the detriment of frontline workers, the frontline workers who are doing the dangerous jobs that we need them to do to keep us safe. Now, action is desperately needed, and the largest beneficiary of this government's failed immigration and criminal policies has been organized crime. Canada's become a low-risk, high-reward environment. They choose the path of least resistance. These strict border controls put in place during the pandemic saw the Canadian market shift from being an importer of fentanyl to becoming a domestic producer. Now, CSIS has found that synthetic drugs are increasingly being produced in Canada using precursor chemicals from China. This is what experts are saying. And it's estimated that about 80% of these precursor chemicals that are...
I want to thank the member. Questions and comments. The Chief Whip. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a lot of talk has occurred today regarding the comments of the Leader of the Opposition when he referred to the RCMP as, quote, despicable. We've been asking some members of the Conservatives about this today. Some have wanted to say something, like the member from Bow River who referred to the RCMP as having, quote, management weaknesses. Others, on the other hand, haven't really wanted to weigh in. The member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes had a lozenge in his throat when he was asked about it and therefore couldn't say anything. I'm wondering if this member would like to weigh in as to whether or not he thinks that the leadership of the RCMP is despicable.
The honourable member from Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, when this government tries to distract Canadians from the real failures that this government has created, they are giving our frontline, it is despicable that this government has not given the resources to our frontline officers to do the job that they're doing, and they're hiding so that they can avoid accountability for the failures. The CBSA union has said that their morale is at the lowest level that it has ever been, and that's under 10 years of failed Liberal leadership, and Conservatives will take no lessons from these Liberals on how to stand up for our...
Thank you, and the honourable member from... Nora, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You made a great choice there. I appreciate the comments from the member from Parkland and sharing those thoughts. He just spoke about the Liberal failures. Of course, the Liberals have been government now for 10 years, Mr. Speaker, and what we've seen is that they've broken the bail system. They have failed to get frontline officers on the border or from law enforcement the resources they need. And I'm wondering if the member wants to speak more to that about this pattern of failure of this Liberal government to keep Canadians safe.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my honourable colleague for his excellent question and his hard work for his constituents. We know he's doing an excellent job in Northern Ontario. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the ideological bent of this government is not to empower our frontline officers to do their job. This is a government that's beholden to a woke ideology where they pass bills like C-75 that tell judges to let criminals out at the earliest convenience with the least amount of restraints. And it's clear that it's policies like this that are being called out by frontline police officers, called out by police associations, that are causing the havoc and violence that we're seeing on our street. Our party stands behind our...
Questions and comments. Time for a short. Is that
Shepherd. Shepherd.
Honourable member from Shepherd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. But one important aspect, and as I mentioned in my speech, is the securing borders and human resources to make sure we have enough officers and personnel at border crossings to be efficient. And one bloc proposals is to have circulation on both sides of the border, but this is not the first time they've seen cuts to CBSA. We were already talking about this issue, which was crucial. It was under the Conservatives. They cut, which had a major impact at border crossings.
The honourable member.
Speaker, I thank my bloc colleague for that excellent question. We know that with the longest undefended border in the world, there's no way we could hire enough police officers or CBSA officers to man every inch of our border. And that's why we need to make investments in technology and equipment. Except when this government had the opportunity to hire Canadian workers and Canadian businesses, what did they do? They chose to hire Black Hawk helicopters from the U.S. government that they had to give a Transport Canada waiver to because these helicopters were not safe to fly over Canadian skies. Why are they choosing American companies over Canadian companies that can do the job? We need to grow our Made in Canada border security, not hire companies that have to get waivers because they're not safe to use in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.